Hi, everyone. Liz LeClair, as was mentioned, and I'm talking today on silence and ending violence and how our stories can help us heal. So for close to a decade, I've worked publicly to raise awareness about gender-based violence in Nova Scotia. And here's what I've learned. Peace does not begin with silence. In many of our communities, violence is not hidden. It's often normalized. Not through cruelty, but through politeness. Through phrases like, don't make waves, don't interfere, it's not our business, or it's just how things are. But silence doesn't keep people safe. It keeps harm intact. We cannot heal what we cannot name. And we cannot end violence if telling the truth costs someone their relationships, their livelihood, or their safety. I would know. Truth-telling is often framed as a brave individual act, but that framing lets systems off the hook. Because what matters most is not the moment that someone speaks, it's what happens after. Are they believed? Are they protected? Does anything actually change? Truth-telling without care can re-traumatize, but truth-telling met with accountability becomes a form of resistance. So the real question isn't, why don't people speak up? It is, what are we doing that makes silence safer than telling the truth at all? Pugwash is known as, around the world, as a place where people dared to speak hard truths in the pursuit of peace, even when it was uncomfortable and even when it disrupted the status quo. But peace is not only built through global agreements. It's built in our homes, our workplaces, and most importantly, it's built in our communities. Silence has never kept us safe. If we truly want peace, the question isn't whether we're ready to hear the truth, but if we're ready to act on it when we hear it. So I want to tell you a little bit about the moment I learned what it actually costs to speak up and what made it possible when I did. I have spent my career raising money for organizations that serve our communities, hospitals, universities, and foundations. For years, I watched my male colleagues walk freely through boardrooms and donor dinners or events. I happened to attend one here in Pugwash about 10 years ago, and I navigated something very different. So in 2019, I wrote an op-ed for CBC News about my experience with sexual harassment and sexual assault in the nonprofit sector. I didn't name anyone specifically. I just told the truth about what it feels like to be a woman and a fundraiser, to smile through the comments about my body, to deflect the propositions from the men with wealth and power, whose donations the organizations I worked with and the communities that I served depended on. I stayed silent because I really truly believed that the cause was more important than my own safety. The response changed something in me, the response to my article, because I realized that my silence, while well-intentioned as it was, had not protected anyone. It had just kept the problem invisible. So I stopped being silent. Prolific is a word for it. I'm sure there's some people that wish I was quiet. I filed complaints. I went public, and in my experience, the systems designed to protect people like me failed me. And they failed me repeatedly. I continued to pursue justice to this day, and I will not stop until I've exhausted every avenue. But as frustrating as all of this was, here's what did happen. In telling my story, other victims and survivors came forward. They felt seen. Other survivors found their voices because my story gave them permission to name what had happened to them, more often than not by the same man. That is what is possible by retaining your voice. It's not just justice and healing for yourself, but the possibility of helping healing others. And that is the possibility that those who want to keep us silent are most afraid of. So for those of you that are too young to remember the height of the Me Too movement, and I am looking at that side of the room, the high school students. Let me place this in context. So in the fall of 2017, the New York Times published an investigation into Harvey Weinstein, one of the most powerful film producers at that time in Hollywood. The piece documented decades of documented allegations of sexual abuse against dozens of women, and critically, how that abuse had been covered up. One of the tools used to cover up all of this was a document called non-disclosure agreements, or NDAs for short. The term Me Too was coined by Tirana activist and Black activist Tarana Burke in 2006 as a rallying cry for survivors of sexualized violence in the Black community, to know that they were not alone. In 2017, it was also used by a number of the celebrities that were impacted by Harvey Weinstein's actions, and it exploded globally as survivors across multiple industries and around the world came forward. It was a moment of collective reckoning, and it was also the first time I heard the name Zelda Perkins. This is my friend Zelda, one of the most incredible people I've ever met, and somebody incredibly brave. So Zelda Perkins was Harvey Weinstein's assistant, and in 2017, she was the first woman to break her silence and her NDA around Harvey Weinstein's sexual abuse. Over the last decade, Zelda has spoken out about losing her voice, her career, her livelihood, all because she reported Weinstein's abuse of her colleague. Zelda did exactly what we all thought we were supposed to do when we see injustice. We tell people in power, and we assume that they're going to help us. Instead, Zelda was forced to sign an NDA in exchange for promises that Harvey Weinstein would get therapy and that he would never hurt another person ever again, which we know ended up not being true. She was coerced through an almost 24-hour period in a locked room with lawyers to take a settlement and to sign an NDA, where she would never be able to speak about what happened to her ever again. They tell you not to meet your heroes, but I have had the privilege of getting to know Zelda personally, and she is absolutely everything that you would hope she would be. She is courageous, she's determined, her moral compass is unwavering, and she's singularly focused on helping people regain their voice. What Zelda did in 2017 wasn't just brave, it was the beginning of something significant, a moment in history that changes everything. Because when one person breaks their silence and takes a risk, it shows others what's possible. And it showed me that my voice matters. She shared this quote with me to share with you today, that having an agreement that requires somebody not to speak about abuse or trauma is unethical. But while Zelda's experience was infamous and known globally, there are people in our own backyards here in the Maritimes experiencing similar situations. Women like Wendy Carroll and my friend Erin Casey, who lived for 12 years under an oppressive NDA. Wendy and Erin were employees of the University of Prince Edward Island. And in 2012, they filed complaints of sexual harassment against the then university president. They were offered a settlement, and they were also asked to sign NDAs. For 12 years, they were legally required to stay silent while the institution and the community and the people that they worked with just moved on. Both women found this so difficult and so isolating that they actually relocated from Prince Edward Island to Nova Scotia and had to start all over again. And I will just say that there are some people that I know in this room today that have had to do some similar things, and it is not right. Imagine having to leave your home, your career, and your community because you cannot explain to anyone what happened to you or defend yourself against whatever stories are out there about what happened to you. In January 2026, after a 2-year process, they were fully released from their NDAs. And I asked Erin if she wanted to share anything with the audience today. And she gave me this quote: "Being bound by an NDA is like being wrongfully imprisoned. You carry the shame and stigma of someone else's misconduct. Being released after carrying a perpetrator and the institution's secrets for 12 years feels just, but the harm cannot be undone." 12 years. Imagine 12 years of not being able to tell anyone what happened to you, not your family, not your friends, not your colleagues, sometimes not even a counselor. So how many people prior to this have heard of an NDA? That's actually really impressive. I wasn't sure. So non-disclosure agreements, or NDAs, were originally created as an intellectual property protection piece of legislation for trade secrets. Proprietary business information. So you invent something, you create something, and you want to make sure that somebody that's working for you doesn't take that and move to another company and give that to the company, and then they take it and build it. But somewhere along the way, they became something else entirely. They became a tool to silence people who survive abuse of all kinds. And here's how it works. Basically, someone's harassed at work, assaulted at work. They might have a workplace incident, racial discrimination, anything you can possibly think of. And they bring the complaint, they report it to their employers. That's when lawyers get involved. And no offense to any of the lawyers in the room, this is not one of the better things that has happened. The survivors offered a settlement. Most publicly reported cases are offered as little as a few $1,000s in exchange for signing a document that says they will never speak about what happened to them ever again. In some cases, victims and survivors might be restricted from speaking to their family and friends, to a counselor, and some have actually reported that the NDAs included clauses telling them not to report to police. So what are the elements of an NDA? It's important to know what you're looking for. I just want everyone who leaves here today to be able to walk out of this door informed, especially those of you that are going to be going into the workforce. I want you to know what you're looking for. It's important to know that the one I have up on the screen is actually the one that was put in front of me in 2019 from the Nova Scotia Human Rights Commission. So you can see that it states parties will not communicate directly or indirectly, personally or through an agent, basically a third party, the terms of a settlement unless to receive legal or taxation advice. So you can see that the three main elements of an NDA are that they limit what you can say, they limit who you can say it to, and they're time-bound. These are the most common elements of a non-disclosure agreement. And once you know what you're looking for, my hope is that you'll be able to ask questions. And if you don't feel comfortable signing it, you'll be able to walk away from it and not sign an NDA if you don't want to. Because knowledge is power, and that's what this TEDx session is all about. So why I refused an NDA. I know about all of this because it happened to me. I filed a complaint with the Nova Scotia Human Rights Commission in 2019, and I was offered a preliminary settlement, which I showed you, had an NDA included. It was contingent on me signing that agreement. It would have required me to sign my story and never be able to talk to anyone else ever again, so I refused it. And I need to say, my husband is in the room today, and I owe a lot of gratitude to him because he has been a big part of this journey, and so has my mother. And they're a reason why I was able to do this. A lot of people are not. So a lot of people ask me why walk away from a settlement when you've been through so much already, and that's because you can't move past your trauma when you don't have ownership of your own story. NDAs are not helping survivors. Research by Can't Buy My Silence, a global advocacy organization that Zelda Perkins and a Canadian law professor founded, shows that mental health impacts of signing an NDA are significant, with over 93% of the participants saying it had a detrimental impact on their mental health. Serial perpetrators also go unchecked. These people, we call it passing the garbage. They move from one organization to another, continuing to do the same things because no one knows what they got up to. This doesn't just happen in film studios or corporate boardrooms. It happens in nonprofits. It happens in universities. It happens in government departments. It happens in the government. It happens everywhere. And how can we seek a peaceful and just society if we are asking survivors to stay silent? But I'm not here to leave you feeling hopeless. Peace is something that we achieve because we hold out hope for a better future. I'm here to tell you that change is possible because it's already happening. In 2022, Prince Edward Island became the first place in Canada and one of the only places in the world to pass legislation banning the misuse of NDAs in cases of harassment, discrimination, and sexual misconduct. According to CBC, it was passed unanimously. What PEI showed us is that this reform is achievable, that governments can act, that survivors can be protected, and that when the right people and the right political will come together, change can happen. In January 2026, the United Kingdom passed some of the strongest NDA legislation in the world thanks to Zelda's tireless advocacy. It's legislation that prohibits abusive agreements. It actually bans non-disparagement clauses, which is a whole other presentation for another TEDx, and release survivors of crimes from historical NDAs. So we must ask ourselves, how does that silence support? Here in Nova Scotia, many advocates have also been pushing for similar legislation. That work continues, and while it does, survivors are still navigating these agreements every day, carrying the weight of enforced silence while trying to heal. So we must ask ourselves, how does that silence support their peace? How does it support ours? Seeing this legislation come to pass across the globe gives me hope. Hope that one day we will pass this legislation in Nova Scotia and across Canada. That survivors and their families will know that they can speak freely without fear of retribution or legal consequence. That they'll be able to talk to whoever they need to in order to help them heal. Advocacy work is a long game. And as my friend Zelda has said, it's about systems, it's about continuing to push and always being ready with the right time and the right people and the right political movement to make it happen. We're not there yet in Nova Scotia, and we're not there yet in a lot of Canada, but we are getting closer. And I know for certain there's a number of people in this room that are committed to not stopping until we see that change happen. So, like I said, I've been doing this for a long time. I've dyed up the gray hair. Not that there's anything wrong with gray hair. There have been moments of speaking that have cost a lot to me and my family in speaking up. They've been really real, professionally, personally, legally. There are days when it would have been a lot easier for me to stay quiet. But every time I've told the truth, something has shifted. Someone has come forward who's been waiting for permission. Someone has healed because they can finally name what happened to them. Someone has felt less alone. That's what having a voice does, not just for the individual who uses it, but for everyone who witnesses it. We are here in Pugwash, a place that carries a history of people who sat across tables of differences and decided to say difficult things in service of a more peaceful world. That spirit matters. And it's needed, because peace, and I mean real peace, is not the absence of conflict. It is not the absence of noise. It is not the quiet that comes when people are afraid to speak. Real peace is what becomes possible when the truth is safe to tell. When survivors are believed, when institutions and individuals are held accountable, when we build systems that protect people rather than protect power. We're not there yet. We're not there yet, but we will be one day. I believe that to be true. We are closer than we were, and we keep getting closer. And as long as we refuse to stay silent, we'll keep getting a little bit closer every day. So remember, peace is what becomes possible when the truth is safe to tell. Thank you so much.